Hi everyone, I'm Raga D'silva, your host for Older Queer Voices. Today's episode focuses on domestic abuse within LGBTQ plus communities. Before we begin, a quick content note. We'll be talking about domestic abuse and lived experiences, which some listeners may find difficult. Please take care while listening. Domestic abuse remains a significant issue across the UK. Recent figures from the Office for National Statistics show that around 3.8 million people experienced domestic abuse in the last year, and around 1 in 4 adults will experience it at some point in their lives. When we look at LGBTQ plus communities, the reality is often less visible, but just as serious. Research suggests that LGBTQ plus people experience domestic abuse at similar or higher rates, yet many do not access support. Some studies indicate that majority of LGBTQ plus survivors never reach formal services, often because they fear not being believed, being misunderstood, or facing discrimination. For people in same sex relationships and for trans and non binary people, abuse can be shaped by identity in ways that they are still not widely understood. That might include threats around outing someone, undermining someone's gender identity, or using wider social prejudice as a form of control. Today's conversation is about bringing those realities into the open. I'm joined by two guests who bring both professional experience and lived experience to us. Let me invite Debbie Cannon, who is a specialist in trans and non binary domestic abuse and leads Trans Without Abuse at MyCWA. Debbie will talk more about you for the time being. Welcome.
Thank you, Raga. Thanks for having me as a guest.
We have Michelle, who has worked in disability sport for over 30 years, including coaching Paralympic swimmers and leading major initiatives in inclusive sport. She also brings lived experience of domestic abuse within same sex relationship. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me, Raga.
I know it is a very dark topic today, and something that I've experienced in my life, sadly, not in this relationship, thankfully, which I've been in for 20 years. But in my first lesbian relationship, I've had the most horrifying and the most traumatic experience. Even to date, I never sit back and ever think about it because I don't think I've healed and I don't know whether I will ever heal from it. So before we start, I just want to start with listeners. Listeners always want to know, who is Debbie? Who is Michelle? So Debbie, we're going to start with you. So who are you? And what has your journey been? And what has your experience been that has shaped you, how you understand domestic abuse today?
I mean, who am I? I'm literally a trans woman who is leading a domestic abuse service here in Cheshire. I transitioned first in 2012. So societal attitudes towards trans folks was pretty ambivalent at best. When I first started my transition, obviously things have changed significantly in the recent years. My understanding of domestic abuse really formed when I started my role in October of 23 with Trans Without Abuse. There's a societal understanding of domestic abuse as, battery. I've heard it framed as, and any abuse towards a person that's physical. It's very easy for people to understand that that is abusive behavior. But when we look at coercive control, psychological and emotional abuse, technological abuse, financial abuse, all these things are perhaps a bit more difficult to understand, and also there isn't that much out there if you don't have an awareness of or know where to look for these types of behaviors. So my understanding really has come with my training, my specialist training. So I am an IDVA, so independent domestic violence advocate. So I've had to go through that specialist training and learn whilst I'm doing the role as well. So working with survivors, doing specialist training, and being able to understand and be supported by my organization as I've gone through my training has then allowed me to come to the understanding that I sit in front of you today as someone who has experience of working with us who are impacted by domestic abuse.
Thank you, Debbie. And was it anything in your life, in your own lived experience, that may have, say, why am I using the wrong word today? Why did something like this attract you? domestic abuse is a very dark topic, like we said.
It is a dark topic. I've always wanted to help others. I co-founded a charity in 2016 in Dorset to help trans non-binary folks, just from a social point of view. After some certain tragedies that have gone on in the media, I've set up groups online to help support others. So I love helping other people. I'm also a trainee counsellor. I'm in my placement, and I've only got 2 more classes before I qualify. So there's something within me that wants to help others, to allow people to have a better understanding of themselves and to have the support that I didn't have. I think that's the nail on the head. But, so I want to make the world a better place from my having been here, and all of my work, my life is geared towards that.
Yeah, excellent. Debbie, I'm going to go to Michelle now. Michelle, I remember the first time I met you and we were having a coffee together. And I remember within 5 minutes of us meeting, for some reason, we got into this conversation and you gave me one of the most horrifying stories. And I thought mine was bad. And I thought, oh my God, this is bad. So take us back to that time. One is your journey, of course. We want to know who you are and what happened.
Yes, so as I said, I was very young, and I became more controlling. The more successful I was coaching her daughter, the more successful I was in my work, the more abusive she became. And she tried to dehumanize me by telling me I wasn't worth anything. I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for her. She would do things like say, I need your bank card because I need to get some money so we can buy some food. And then she would just empty my account with the bank card. And if I said I'll go to the cash machine and take money out for her, she would always try and snatch the card away from me. And much of the time she spent, a lot of that money on alcohol for herself. And as I said, I don't know if you heard this bit, but like as her daughter became more successful as an athlete, she became more abusive towards her and the other children in the household. And I felt an obligation to protect them all. So quite often would come between her trying to be abusive towards them and standing between them, and I'm the one getting physically hit or physically attacked to stop her from getting to the children. There would be times when we'd go out, we'd come back, and it's unbelievable that someone who is an alcoholic can be so strong and whatever. Before I could even get in the door, quite often she would just slam the door in my face, or as I was walking through the door, she'd push me out backwards and then lock me out the house for the night. And then I would spend the night roaming around the streets because she didn't allow me to have a key for the house. She had the key for the house. Never ever gave me a key, wouldn't allow me to have a key to open or close the house. And I would roll around the streets at night. And actually I had less fear about roaming around the streets as a woman at night in Hackney than I did about going home and being in a house with her. And then in the morning I would arrive and get there in time to be able to take her daughter swimming and coach her and then go off to work, having had very little sleep all night. What did happen was the shame that I felt towards myself and the inability that I felt that I couldn't reach out to anyone because I felt so ashamed of allowing myself to get into the situation, and so ashamed that I couldn't stop her. And like in every abusive relationship, probably in every relationship, you have a fight, you say sorry, you make up, and you think everything's going to be okay. And most of the time, in most normal relationships, they are, and you learn from that and you get over that. But in that relationship, every time she said sorry, I thought, okay, this time she really means it. It's not going to happen again. And it did. And I remember going for a job that I really, really wanted and had consulted on and had given advice to, and a job that I thought would be ideal for me. And the night before the interview, I just don't know how she managed to do this. She managed to grab me and throw me into a banister, and I broke my jaw and my nose. And I landed up walking myself to the local hospital. And even there, when they said, how did this happen? I came up with some really ridiculous excuse, which of course, anyone who's seen abuse would not have believed that, but never got pressed further about it. So I just left it at that. Of course, when I went for the interview, black and bruised and everything, I never got the job because it was like, how can we, employ someone who's going to turn up looking like this. So, you know, and it took me a long time to, and when I say a long time, I mean a good 12 years before I had the strength or the ability to feel like I could do something about it. And actually, it was more about going away on a trip with my swimmers to the World Championships. And I had other swimmers I used to swim with, used to coach, not swim with. And when the night before the event, she beat me up quite badly. I probably should have gone and had stitches in my eye. Managed to get to the airport with her daughter, managed to get on the plane, but it was in a real state. And when we arrived in Canada, I think we were going to, my personal swimmers that I was coaching took me aside and said, "You can't go on like this, she's going to kill you." And I said, "No, nothing's going on, everything's all right." And her daughter said to me, "I see it every night. I see what she does to you every night. I see how you protect me, and you can't do this." And it was almost like that realization that somebody was acknowledging to me that they knew what was going on, that gave me the strength to come back from that trip. And literally, I told her I was leaving, and she literally kicked me out the house with what I had on my back. And I didn't care. I didn't care that I couldn't take anything else. I didn't care that I couldn't have what was mine in the house. I left. And probably that was the first time that I'd acknowledged anything to anybody else, that this had been happening, even though I'm sure people saw it, knew it, saw me with bruises, saw me with cuts, saw me with no money, saw me, you know, and I was in a good job. I should not have not had money. So yeah, that's, you know, my story in some of it.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing this. Even just listening to it is just making me like, it's bringing back my own memories, of course, but it's making me so uncomfortable because this is the uncomfortable truth for many, many, many. I mean, talking about 3.4 million people that I just kind of, and these are the reported cases, right? There are so many of these cases go unreported, and we'll come back to that because I know. But Debbie, I've heard things like people making comments like, you can imagine if two women are like this together, how two men will be, or two trans people, or two non binary people. So we are not only labeled, but we put into these boxes where assumptions are made and judgments are passed about us. So do you think that carries any weight?
I think, unfortunately, it does, but from the person in the relationship, it doesn't. Abuse is indiscriminate. It affects everyone from every walk of life, from every kind of background, every intersectionality that you can think of. But unfortunately, when professionals are assessing domestic abuse, whether it's a domestic abuse service or police force, for example, I mean, I've heard examples of same-sex relationships where they've gone, oh, well, they're as bad as each other if it's a same-sex partner, or how, if it's specifically two men, then they've both got harmful behaviors. If it's two women, it's a lot, well, we can't determine who the aggressor is. Quite often, violent resistance is labeled as harmful behavior as well. I've heard the analogy many times in this work. You can only shake a bottle of pop so many times before it explodes. And quite often, someone, when they're reacting to the person who is the abuser will then use that as a way of coercively controlling them, having the police arrest them and charge them and put bail conditions in place and remove them from their lives. And all the while they're painting the picture of that person as the one with the harmful behaviors, when actually they're the one who's in control of everything, and they're controlling the narrative, they're controlling how others see them. Michelle spoke about how her partner seemed like when she first got in a relationship with her, and like how she was this wonderful person with all these kids and these adopted kids with disabilities and stuff. Like, they paint this picture that this most wonderful human being, but it's behind closed doors where all these behaviors are enacted against the person who is on the receiving end, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is sad because I've seen in my own life, like I said, and reflected in my friends' lives, where the person, the abuser, is always the perpetrator. If you can call the abuser, I don't know what's the right term to use. Is always very charming. Externally they're charming, so you can't even go and tell your friends because they can't see that as that person. They don't believe you. Can't be possible. That person is the life of the party. Can't be something so different behind closed doors. So that's one. When I started, I said that people don't believe you. How is it in a community, let's say for the trans people? Is it any different? Is it again disbelief? misunderstanding, or
I
is
think
it
there are many things. Like
okay?
each person's experience of abuse, Raga, is individual to that person, and like everything in nature, like there's a spectrum of the types of behavior that people will experience, as there will be with anything else in their lives. And I think that with the trans community specifically, there are other things that are going on that might play into the fact why they're struggling to understand that these person's behaviors are abusive. There's systemic abuse going on at the moment societally for trans folks. I mean, you've only got to watch the news or look at the internet to see how much harmful attitudes and communications are out there towards trans and non-binary folks. And I don't need to go into that because I don't want this space to be about today. But essentially, when you have a society that's telling trans people that they're less than, it's easier for a person to control another person who has an identity as trans or non-binary by volition of the fact that society is saying the same things. It's almost like that it's given them permission to behave in that way towards them. I've seen certain types of behavior where the abuser towards a trans or non-binary person will use that and say, well, that's what society says you should have, you should be excluded, you shouldn't have access to affirming care, all those kinds of things. But also, I've seen it flip, Raga, and I've seen someone use affirming behavior towards a trans person in a relationship as a way of hooking them into that relationship. And then as the relationship goes on, there's stuff like financial abuse going on where that person says, oh, do you know what, I'm not good with money. And they'll go, oh, don't worry, you give me the money and I'll pay all the bills. But it doesn't happen. And then loads of debts rack up, or they have a gambling problem. And then they use, they lie about that. So there's all these elements of control that can be going on in the background that the other person is completely oblivious to. And I think when a person's identity is weaponized societally and they have what they deem to be a safe space within a relationship, but then that person used that as a way of controlling them, it's almost like the perfect storm for the person who has those harmful behaviors or who wants to coercively control someone. So yeah, it's really difficult to spot.
Yeah, but I think we'll talk about those red flags as well and how can we identify, because like you said, we've kind of normalized it, right? It becomes part of who we are, part of what we've seen around us. So we think that's normal. I mean, I've seen so many relationships where partners are saying things to each other. And maybe I have done that as well. Maybe it has been done to me as well. Who knows? Because none of us are perfect, but we don't even know that it is abusive. So how do we look for those signs? Are there patterns? I want to come back to you, Debbie. Is it something which we understand and we recognize, but we still don't want to believe it, like what Michelle just spoke about?
I think when we get into a relationship, this person who has these harmful behaviors or these tendencies will be the perfect person. They don't go into a relationship. If they showed you this on the first date, you would never even entertain going on another date with them. They're very clever at hiding who and what they are until they've got the hooks in, kind of thing. You've asked about patterns of behavior, though. I think there are two things that stand out for me, and that are patterns of behavior that are perhaps celebrated and held up as valid patterns of behavior in, especially, I'm going to use queer because it's all inclusive, queer relationships that perhaps wouldn't be in cis heteronormative relationships. And for example, love bombing. Like, who tells you within a month of knowing you that they love you? Like, and almost like there's that whole trope, isn't there, about lesbians, like within the second date they're getting U-Haul and they're moving in together. I mean, that's absolute rubbish. Like, ultimately, if someone is that obsessive with you very early on in the relationship, to me that would be a red flag. And what was the other one? Sorry, my mind's just gone.
No, that's okay.
Ultimately, very, very blank.
Could it also be? I mean, like you talked about.
I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that.
Love bombing. It's a very good. I think this is a whole conversation we can have for an hour on love bombing, right? Because I see this happening all the time, and maybe it happened during my time as well, but I couldn't recognize this. Now there is more to more of this love bombing also, because you've got social media, you're constantly online, you are on WhatsApp, you need to respond quickly, flowers, people, maybe it's more affordable to send gifts and things to people. I see this all the time. While you think of what else you were going to say as in terms of red flag and patterns, unless you remember now.
Yeah, I've remembered it. So jealousy as well. So it's often held up that you have to be insanely jealous in a relationship. Like, to me, that's an ultimate red flag. Like, if someone can't handle the fact that you have relationships outside of the intimate relationship, then that's a problem. Like, you should be able to have friends, family, community spaces, like people in your life who are outside of the relationship. I mean, ultimately, you get into a relationship because of the individual that you are. And if the person who's in a relationship with you tries to make your world get smaller and smaller. Lauren Laverne, who's a famous DJ, she's spoken about her experience with abuse with one partner. In the way that she explained it, I think it's a beautiful way of putting it. She said she felt like she was in a box, and as the relationship continued, the box got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until there was just her in a box, and like she didn't have any friends. She couldn't go anywhere. She couldn't wear what she wanted to. Every element of her identity, her life was controlled by this other person. She had to run it through their filter, and if it didn't live up to what they wanted, there was a reaction. And ultimately, like, if someone's jealous very early on in the relationship as well, I'd ask them, like, why? Like, there's jealousy generally comes from fear. And, you know, it's absolutely ordinary to feel jealousy in some relationships, but when it's used as a method of controlling a person, and that's when it's a red flag.
Yeah, interesting. Because there are many, many instances, again, you know, watching films, reading books, where in a way abuse is romanticized. The man stalking you, the man obsessing over you, the man trying to find your love, even when you have said no, so there's no consent. So that's also abuse, and we kind of romanticize that. Man slapping you. There's a film that was released in India, which I haven't watched because just from the reviews, it was boiling my blood. I was thinking, how? Because in that film, apparently the Bollywood movie, the man is seen to be controlling the wife in such a way that she even licks his feet and his shoes because she's so submissive, and we romanticize that kind of stuff. And I think we believe people who get abused or victims of abuse believe that that is how we have to be loved. And Michelle, I'm going to come back to you because this is a very interesting part of it. Did you, because when Debbie was talking about the box getting smaller and smaller and smaller, I saw you nod, and I understand that you may have felt that. But did you have any support system outside of that relationship, one that you felt you could go to and they was safe enough for you to talk to, and two, you felt that you would be believed?
So that's I nod my head because that's exactly what happened. You know, slowly. You know, I wasn't allowed to see this person or that person. And if I talked to somebody else, of course I was having an affair, never mind anything else. Just I was having a conversation, not an affair. And it did get smaller and smaller. And the reality was I was coaching my elite athletes, and I was coaching at an LGBTQ+I swimming club. And I was, you know, and what she would do was she would come everywhere I went and sit in the car or sit on poolside or watch everything I did. So there was no ways that I felt I could talk to anybody or felt it was safe enough to talk to anybody. And, you know, I also felt that I couldn't even reach out to my family because, I mean, every time that I did something wrong, she was going to phone my family and tell them what a rat I was and what a terrible person I was and what a horrible person I was and what a selfish person I was. And it was like, you know, that made me feel even more shame. Was I didn't want my family to know that's what I'm like, even though I knew, you know, on my rational side of me knew that I wasn't like that at all. But when you're in that situation and you're made to believe that you are such a bad person, you don't have that. And I didn't really have a support system. And really interestingly, I had a friend when I first came to this country that I met, and we really hit it off and we got on really, really well. And I was not allowed to see her. And for those 12 years that we were together, I couldn't see Ali. And then it just so happened that I bumped into her when I was at a training camp with my swimmer in Manchester, and Ali was living in Manchester. And it was the first time I spoke to anybody about what was going on. And I said to Ali, I said, I want to be in touch with you, but I can't. If I have your phone number in my phone, she'll accuse me of having an affair. Anyway, we concoct silly name. We connected her to swimming, and I had Ali's phone number in my phone, so that actually, I could phone her if I wanted to. But messaging was a no-no, because she read every message that came to my phone. And if I didn't give her my phone for her to check the messages that came through that day, or emails or anything else, I would pay for it. And it wasn't until that point when I started talking to Ali that I really had anybody that I felt I could talk to. And this kind of like all culminated at the same time. So I started speaking to Ali, was on this training camp, started speaking to her. Then we went to a party with, from the swimming club, the LGBTQ plus swimming club, and a couple of the women came up and cornered me in the corner while my partner at the time was getting a drink. And they said to me, "Are you okay? Something doesn't feel right. Talk to us." And I said, "I can't talk to you. I'm okay. Everything's okay." And then 3 weeks later, we went on this trip where I went away with my swimmers to the World Championships. And at that point, when my swimmers said to me, "She's going to kill you. You've got to do something about it." And it wasn't until then that I really had the strength to do anything about it. And, for a while afterwards, I really beat myself up for not acting sooner, for not doing anything about it. But then I sat down and I kind of like rationalized with myself. I can sit here and feel really, really sorry about myself, or I can sit here and change my narrative and make sure that this never, ever happens to me again. I know all the signs now. I know what to look out for. I don't want to be around negative people. I don't want to be in that situation. Funnily enough, when I told this person I was leaving, and somehow Ali's name came up, and she said, "Oh, you've probably been having an affair with her." And I just burst out laughing. I said, "I haven't seen her for 12 years and you're accusing me of having an affair with her." I said, "That shows how ridiculous you are." And literally, as I said, I walked out the house with nothing.
Wow, Michelle, it's like I'm not the only one. I keep thinking everything that you're saying has happened to me as well, And I just want to understand, did you ever take the support of the police, for instance? Because
Yeah.
one is, of course, calling domestic abuse lines, which are available, which you could call and report. One is actually going to the cops.
So no, I didn't call the police. And it was kind of interesting because sometimes she got so drunk she would play act that she was having an epileptic fit, or play act that something happened. And one day she just lay in the middle of the road pretending to have this fit, and the ambulance turned up. And actually, I remember one of the crew members saying to me, she's not having a fit. There's nothing wrong with her. What are you doing here with her?" And, I'm sure the ambulance member was another lesbian, really sure about it, because she was so nice to me and so supportive. And she said, "We can call the police." And I said, "What's the point? They're not going to believe me when I say that another woman has been doing this to me." I said, I said, just leave it. If you can just help me get her inside, and, I'll be all right, kind of thing. But that was the only time really from anyone from those services that I turned to, because I just didn't believe that anyone would believe me that this was happening in a same-sex, relationship.
It is interesting, Michelle. I'm just going to go back to one instance when my book was launched, Untold Lies, and it was getting launched in London and at the Nehru Center, where one of the largest, this person was the director of the Nehru Center at that time. And he's one of those, his name is Amish Tripathi, and he sold about 90 million copies of his book. So he's like really big. And while he was, doing this interaction with me, he said to me, I read that chapter on punishment, where I had talked about this very briefly about this incident in my life. And he said, "Why are you sitting here and saying your ex-husband is a really lovely man when obviously he did what he did to you in that chapter? You've written it in your book." And was shocked. I said, "What made you believe that it was my ex-husband?" See, there's instantly people assume that if you've had physical violence, physical abuse, it is always the man. And I said, "No, it wasn't a man. It was a woman." I said, "You made this assumption." And that is what I'm saying. Same-sex relationship, people don't believe that anybody could be violent. And Debbie, I'm just going to come back to you in terms of, like, we spoke about patterns, but when people call you or connect with you, what is the typical issues that they talk about? What is the typical form of abuse that they talk about? And like I said, do they even understand it's abuse?
Quite often it's like, I don't want to waste your time. I don't think what I'm experiencing is abuse, but when they start to share their story or some of the things that is happening to them, I've not had one call yet where someone's phoned me or interacted with my service, reached out for help, and what they've been going through hasn't been abuse. And that's in 2.5 years. So that should tell you more than anything.
Yeah. So do you see what Michelle talked about earlier was shame? And I understand that word shame is a very strong, value that we carry within us, that feeling, that emotion. So do you feel that people don't disclose out of that shame, internalized shame, or is it fear of that perpetrator coming after them as well?
I mean, post-separation abuse affects more people than we're kind of is widely communicated and discussed. So Cheshire Without Abuse, which is the charity Trans Without Abuse is a part of, we just did the survivors survey in partnership with Samantha Billingham, who's a campaigner survivor as well. We had over 1,000 respondents, and of those respondents, I think it was 79% had experienced post-separation abuse. So even when you leave the relationship, that abuse can, and quite often, and more often than not, does continue. A lot of the trans people who I've supported, especially those who've had intimate partner violence enacted towards them, most of them will experience abuse from the people with harmful behaviors after the separation. And if it's familial abuse, because that's obviously it's becoming more and more common, especially with societal attitudes towards trans folks. And if you look at what they're trying to do with young people and preventing them from assessing gender affirming care and all those kinds of things that are going on societally, like we're seeing an increase in familial abuse going on as well. Like families are coercively controlling their children's identities, so preventing them from living their truth or being authentic in their lives. It breaks my heart, it really does. But there is a shame as well, Raga, absolutely, like you said. Like it's almost, and I'm sure that you both of you being survivors can relate to what I'm going to say a little bit. Like it's almost like, how did I let this happen to me? Like I love this person and this is how they treated me, but it's that constant that gaslighting and telling you that no one will believe you, and then becoming omnipotent in you almost believe what they tell you over a period of time. So it's really, really difficult for the person who is experiencing the abuse to take a step back and understand that what they're behaving, what the behaviors that are being enacted towards them are harmful. Like it's almost like you have to have someone else tell you, look, this isn't right. This isn't healthy behaviors. And then when you take a step back from the situation, it's only then you can see it with different eyes. But it's really hard when you're in a situation to be able to understand that what you're going through is abusive, because they're telling you that it's not, and they're blaming it all on you. So how do you know that it's any different?
Yeah, because I think you're trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes
Absolutely.
on a moment-to-moment basis, you don't have that energy or the opportunity. I remember just there was like in your case, Michelle, there was only one person I ever took the courage, had the courage to speak with. And I was telling Debbie earlier before you rejoined us, that this person that I was seeing dating at that time was so charming around the world that this friend of mine, she said, I can't believe it. It's unimaginable. Okay. And even when they saw bruises all over my body and my face. And the second thing they said, I remember, like, what did you do? What did you do to make her react that way? Like I said, like, my God, for 2.5 years, I did something every day for that person to react. So the blame is put back on the person. So victim blaming, right? That is quite common. So in your case, when you said that you were independent financially, which is great, you had a job, you were successful in your career. So do you think that success gave you that extra strength to finally leave the relationship, or was it in spite of the success that you stayed in the relationship?
So I think two things. I think the success kept me having that ability to, that I knew that I would be going away with some team to these events, gave me that breather. And I knew that she couldn't control me from there. Even though she tried, she'd phone me at all hours. She'd tell me what I can do or couldn't do. Would blame me if she didn't have any money because I hadn't left my card for her. But it was a breather. And it almost like spurred me on that I've got to be successful at something. If I'm not being successful in the relationship, I've got to be successful at something else. So I suppose it spurred me on to do that. And I think I think, you know, when I think of myself as a young 20-year-old, when I first met her, I lacked confidence. I was very overweight. I thought no one would love me. And here was someone who came and told me how much they loved me. You know, and a bit like what Debbie said, is like you hear that, you think that, and you think, wow, somebody's paying me attention. Someone thinks I'm great. And it took 2 years before all the real true colors started to come out. So, you know, I was really hooked in by those 2 years. So I think being successful and saying I was financially independent, I was, but actually, you know, everything that was bought in that house, you know, new fridge, oh, we'll put it on we'll pay as you know, on credit. So everything was in my name. So when I left, I actually owed £30,000 and I couldn't do anything about it. And then once I'd left, that post, you know, relationship abuse carried on. And then one day I was doing an application for a mortgage, and then something came back and said, you can't get a mortgage because you have a black mark against you for a credit card you took out. And I went, what credit card? I've never taken out a credit card. And then when I investigated it, even after I'd left the relationship, she had taken a credit card out in my name, given all my details, knew my work stuff, knew my salary, because it wasn't long after I left the relationship. The only saving grace for me was that I could prove I was out of the country at a Paralympic Games while she was making that claim and got the credit card. And she got this credit card and maxed it out at, I think, £10,000 or something ridiculous like that. But, you know, had I not had that proof that I was out of the country, I would have been liable for that as well. So I suppose I gained confidence from doing well at work. I gained confidence from being successful. And I gained the strength once people started to approach me and say, hey, we know what's going on. You know, you've got to get out of that. You've got to do that. And then eventually I spoke to, when I left, I went to stay with my cousin who I'd never spoken to, and I spoke to her. And then all of a sudden I just felt like I had all the strength to deal with it. And I didn't care if she came after me once I'd left, or if she tried, you know, and she did. She tried to blackmail me. She tried to say that I abused her children sexually. She tried to say that I did all these things. But I knew that that wouldn't stick, because I knew, you know, I knew by then that her children knew what I'd done and wouldn't say that. And also knew that I protected lots of them in situations. So I began to gain more strength from the fact of, once I walked out, I could do that. And I still didn't talk to lots of people about it. And I didn't admit it to a lot of people, because it was very difficult for me still to do that, even though I started to kind of like change how I held relationships. And even now, sometimes I think some of my behaviors in my relationships revert back to that. So sometimes I hold back and don't say something, just in case my partner might shout at me, because it didn't matter what I'd say to her, I'd always get shouted at, whether it was good, bad, indifferent. It doesn't happen so much now, because I'm like much older, more, you know, I've learned from that. And I've learned that actually, you know, an honest relationship where love is really involved, you've got to be open and honest and talk about what hurts, what doesn't hurt, what you like, what you don't like. But for a long time afterwards, I still held back, still wouldn't say things, still wouldn't open up if I thought I was in the wrong, in case I might get into trouble.
Wow. Gosh, Michelle, it's like so sad to hear. I hope the listeners who are listening relating to this, and I'm sorry if you're relating to this kind of a story, but I think please ask for help, reach out for support. It's so important that you don't stay. You don't have to stay. That is the most important thing to remember. You don't have to stay. Debbie, I was just going to ask you, if someone like a Michelle came to you with a story like that, what would you do?
First of all, I would try and determine what the current situation was and do safety planning with them. You know, not everyone wants to leave a relationship that has harmful behaviors, and sometimes if someone gets the intervention who has harmful behaviors and does some behavior change work, then, you know, the relationship can sustain beyond this difficult period. But, you know, safety planning would be the first and foremost. Like, are you safe? Like, do you need to do you want, you know, what do you want to happen? I think quite often there's this automatic assumption that if someone's in an abusive relationship, they want to leave. That's not always the answer, nor is it often practical. But there are protections for victims of domestic abuse, like a domestic abuse protection order. So if you're in the home with the abuser and you have kids and you don't want to move, you know, you can have an application to get a domestic abuse protection order, and then they're not allowed within that home anyway. So there are steps and measures out there to help you, you know, from a legal point of view, like speak to the police, speak to the Gallup if it's an LGBT domestic abuse, if it's transgender abuse, you know, you can reach out to Trans Without Abuse. If we're not the right organization to support you because of where you live, then certainly we'll signpost you to someone who can support you. I think having someone who holds space for you, who understands what you're going through, and then is able to do that planning with you to make sure that you're safe and that you're not at any risk of any further harm, or you know what to do if the situation does escalate. That's all I can do as a professional. I can't say to a person leave, because it's you know, I'm not the person in the relationship, and I only have what I'm being told. The most important thing I can do: hold space, safety plan, and then do what that person wants to do and help support them as much as I can.
Sure. So, you know how there's a code word, right? Code name called Angela. For instance,
Mhm.
somebody's facing abuse, you go to a pub and you can say Angela. And if they've been trained in it, then that's a
Yes.
sign that somebody is facing abuse, and then they take action. Do we have a code word for the queer community?
I've seen in some of the queer spaces that I've frequent ask for Angela, the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, it's a great idea, Raga. Maybe it's something I need to go away and you know, do some more research and you know, communicate with my
Yeah.
LGBTQ colleagues, like to say, is there one? And if there isn't, why don't I know about it, given the work
Yeah.
that I do? But yeah,
Sure.
ask for Angela generally.
Yeah, but I think it's something that we need to think about for our community, where we instantly know that the person is not heterosexual. So it is it is from the queer community, and that because we do have a different kind of abuse as well. You know, there's, like you said, because it could be societal, whatever is happening, the whole narrative in the community right now against the trans people. I mean, that's terrible in itself. How is that
Yeah.
used, Debbie? How is that used in such abusive relationships?
If someone's being abusive towards a trans person, essentially what they're doing is they're controlling their identity. They're preventing them from accessing gender affirming care, gender affirming spaces. They're not recognizing their pronouns, you know, not respecting their physical boundaries, you know, making fun, ridiculing their transition surgery sites, for example, touching areas that the other person doesn't want them to touch. I've seen it weaponized in identities that are outside mononormative identities, so polyamorous relationships where, you know, one part is used in the polyamorous set up to be able to abuse the other person as well. Like, they're saying, right, I can be open and poly, but you can't. You know, there are many elements to risk into people's relationships. It's not a one size fits all. I think that's really important to take that away from this podcast as well. It's to understand that, like, your situation is individual to you. If something doesn't feel right in your relationship, reach out. It's really that simple. I would much rather someone contact me or contact a professional, have that conversation, and for there not to be an issue than them not, and then for something bad to happen as a result of them not reaching out and asking for that support. And remember, it's drip, drip, drip. Like, this behavior, like Michelle shared a few moments ago, it was 2 years before she saw any of these kind of behaviors like come out. So it can take a long time.
Yeah, but Debbie, in my case, it was day one.
Goodness me.
Yeah, and that was my first lesbian relationship. Until then, I had no idea. So I really thought maybe I'm misreading into this. But day one, day two, day three, it got. So it's like, you know, when you do gaming, the levels change.
Yeah.
So it's like almost like abusive people, they change that. They go from level one to whatever levels you allow them to. And by the time we finished that relationship and I finally walked out, I was fully broken, physically broken. My house was fully smashed, like
Goodness.
everything, doors, everything. And I had a terror attack one night, like where all night I was beaten up. I'm surprised that I even survived that. So sometimes you can know about it on day one, but for whatever reason you choose to stay. And like you said, no two cases are alike, no two experiences are alike. So we need to be mindful. We need to look for these red flags. And I hope the listeners who are here today can understand that there is no typical pattern. There is a pattern of abuse, and just be aware that that's what I say.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
I mean, saying there's no pattern of abuse, that's not strictly true. Like if someone's trying to control any element of you, your identity, how you show up in the world, who you see, what you wear, all those kinds of things, these are signs that something isn't right. Like an equitable relationship, both people have an equal say in all elements, whether it's finances, whether it's what you do, you know, how you spend your money, whatever it is, both parties should have an equal say in what happens in that relationship. Is someone trying to control you and put you in a box and not allow you to express yourself or have the relationships with others outside of that relationship that you want to, something is wrong. Something is inherently wrong with that relationship. And when we talk about risk, and especially as a professional, there's something called the cyclical pattern of abuse. So you'll have experienced this yourself, where you've both referred to it, where everything is fine, then you get a bit build up of tension, and you're walking around on eggshells, and you'll have an event. So like something will happen, and then you have a period of calm, and then it starts to build up again, and then you go have a blow up, and then there's a period of calm, and there's that reparate the honeymoon period where everything's fine when they've said sorry, and that goes round and round and round. And for me as a professional, when the frequency of that increases, so when you see an increase in the frequency, like that, those instances are happening more and more, or there's an escalation in the kinds of abuse, that's when we as professionals are concerned because the risk increases. So for example, if someone's saying, oh, I wouldn't wear that, it doesn't really suit you, and then they start taking money from you, or they're controlling who you see or where you go, and then physical violence starts or sexual violence starts. It's like if you see an escalation and an increase in the number of times that this abuse is happening, to me, that's a red flag. That means that the risk is increasing towards that person who's on the receiving end. So there are patterns, but it's all about, you know, if you're concerned and you're worried about what's happening in your relationship, doesn't feel right, reach out, honestly.
So who do they reach out to, Debbie? Which other,
it depends. I mean, most domestic abuse most councils have commissioned domestic abuse services. If you're from the LGBT community, Gallup or the National LGBT Domestic Abuse Service, you can Google them, you find their number online. There is a National Domestic Abuse Service. There is also buy-in for services. So Trans Without Abuse, we support trans and non-binary folks here in Cheshire. But, you know, I do sometimes extend that to help people from intersectional challenges. So for example, I have a non-binary person who has disabilities. That means that they can't get out the house to support in Yorkshire. So I'm supporting them online. Like, I'm not going to say no if someone can't get out and, you know, they live outside of our area. So it's all about have those conversations with services. And phone 999. If you are in fear of your life or you do not feel safe, ring 999. Like that, the police are trained to deal with this kind of thing.
Excellent. Ring 999 if you feel unsafe. Please do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Michelle, I've just got the final two questions for both of you, one question each. But Michelle, I just want to understand when you go through something this traumatic, and 12 years is a long time. It's almost a lifetime. If you think about it, when you're young, you're like 21, and then by the time you finish, you're a proper adult person. How do you come out of it? How do you recover from something like this?
Well, I think it's really hard, and I think everyone's recovery is different. As I said, I started off by beating myself up, but then thought that's not going to help me. That's not going to make me a better person. I did go to therapy to look at why I allowed this to happen for so long. Why did I feel that I was so helpless? Because I kind of like felt that I'm quite a strong woman. But the other thing that I started doing was, you know, I'm very lucky. I do swimming, I do physical activity. And for me, that kind of like helped me, you know, just get in a swimming pool and swim and think, you know, and separate what I was feeling emotionally to what I was feeling logically, and then to try and logically work out, how do I come out of this? How do I ensure that this doesn't happen again? How can I support others if they come and talk to me? How can I recognize this if I see it happening in others? Because you can't go to someone and say, hey, are you being abused? Because people don't open up like that. But there's ways of being able to be there for people and letting them know, you know, that you're there. And then I just kind of like made the decision that I've got to, you know, I've got to move forward from this, and I can't harp on what happened. But I can't allow myself to get into that situation again. So I've got to make sure that any new relationship and anywhere else, if it doesn't feel right, to leave straight away. and that's what I've done, you know. And I've been very, very lucky since then to, you know, to now be in a wonderful relationship where, you know, it's very loving, it's very equal. I'm not told what to do. I'm not told how to spend my money. I'm not told who I can see, who I can't see. And that makes a huge difference. And I think, you know, if my story can change one person's ability to open up and share what's going on with them, then I feel that I've helped someone. And that's kind of like how I feel that I, you know, why I felt it was important that I came on here and spoke to you.
Thank you, Michelle. You know, I just have this one final question for you. When you were talking, I was thinking, okay, you've been through this, you know the signs. But you know, many years ago, Nigella Lawson was in a restaurant outside, and her husband at that time was, I think he slapped her in front of everyone. People took photos, they wrote about it, but nobody went down to help them, saying, oh, it's a domestic, their problem. It's a domestic issue. We can't interfere. So I just want to understand from you as we close this, and Debbie, I'll come to you finally as well. Michelle, if you saw abuse happening in front of you, whether it was someone known to you, whether it was a stranger, what would you do?
Well, I've done it. I've gone up to someone and said, asked the person that it happened to, are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I help you with anything? And to the other person, I said, this is not acceptable. You can't do this here. And can you just please go away? And then I've helped the person who was attacked, hit in front of everyone, taken them to a quiet place. And, you know, you are putting yourself in danger, but just reassured them, asked them if everything was okay. I never once used the word abuse. I just said, I'm here to help you if you need help. I'm here. If you want help, let me know. Do you need to get home? Do you need help to get home? Do you need someone to go with you to get home? And the other person, I asked another friend I was with to just try and remove them from the situation and engage with them to take them away from that situation. Never saw the person again because it was someone I didn't know, but I stepped in. I felt it was important to step in, but I don't know what happened after that.
But Michelle, this is such a very important thing to have done, and thank you for that. I think listeners, please listen to this very carefully. Rewind, listen to this, share, because we can help not just ourselves, we can help somebody else as well. We don't need to hold back. And just make sure that you do not hold yourself back when you see abuse happening. And again, sadly, it has happened to Nicola and myself in South Bank, in London, in public. People have taken videos, they have shared it online, but not one person came to our aid. So we must not, encourage abuse. And Debbie, I'm going to end this with you. Of course, Michelle, if you have final words to say, we'll come back to you. But Debbie, I just want to understand if someone listening in a same-sex relationship or a gender diverse relationship and is questioning what they're experiencing, what would you want them to hear right now?
I want them to understand that, you know, irrespective of what the person who is abusing you is telling you, there are people out there who will support you, who will believe you, and, you know, reach out.
Thank you. And Michelle, any final words of advice?
No, I would suggest that if you're going through this, as scary as it is, try and find someone you can confide in, as scary as it is. But, you know, don't do what I did. Don't wait so long and to do that.
Yeah, good, great final words. And think it leaves us knowing that we have help, we can seek help if we want, and we can get out of these situations. Don't let the box get smaller and smaller. There's no need to push away that box. So thank you both for your vulnerability, your honesty, and really for sharing so openly. What comes through so clearly for me is how domestic abuse can remain hidden when people don't see themselves reflected in the stories. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted this to happen, this interview, because I want people to understand that it happens. We are not the only one going through it. There are many of us going through it, but that it is possible for us to get out of this. So these conversations, I feel, matter because they help break that silence. And it makes it easier for others to recognize their own experiences. So if you're listening and something in today's episode has resonated with you, please know that you're not alone and you deserve to feel safe, respected, and supported as you are. Thank you for listening to Older Queer Voices. Thank you also to Nicola, who works quietly in the background. So big thanks to you, Nicola. And also to our viewers, if you want to nominate yourself or someone you know, if you want to share this episode, please, or comment, please write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. And thank you again, Debbie and
Thank you.
Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for really, I think we will all need a cup of coffee after this. And thank you so much. And I hope to see you both in person again. And Michelle, I hope to see you very soon. By the way, listeners, Michelle is one of the most funniest persons I've met ever. On that note, bye-bye. See you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.